My name's Adam Adolfo. I am the Artistic Director for Artes de la Rosa at the Rosemarine Theater in Fort Worth. Rights and royalties vary from organization to organization based on the needs of the playwright and copyright holder. Where do you go for these rights and royalties? That's always the next question. I think what's really firm in understanding is there's always a place to go. To say I don't know is really unacceptable. If you found the play, that means it's out there, which means there's either a publisher that owns rights or a licensing company that has rights. In the United States, there are 4 or 5 really principal licensing organizations. Samuel French Incorporated, Dramatists Incorporated, Musical Theater International. There's a new organization that's only come out in the last 5 or 6 years called Amateur Producing, and they handle some of the latest work, things like recent Broadway's Spamalot, or high-profile events like Dora the Explorer. They've been handling those. And then last, the Rodgers and Hammerstein organization, which of course owns all of the Rodgers and Hammerstein music, in addition to a lot of Andrew Lloyd Webber's music as well. Amongst these, I say 5 organizations, you could find almost every play you need, from Chicago and Cabaret to Evita and Oklahoma. Amongst these 5 organizations, they would have it. And not just musicals, but of course Death of a Salesman, A View from the Bridge. It's all there. The next step is, and they try to make it as simple and easy for you as possible. They all have websites, and you can actually apply for your license to the rights online. And it's a simple format. They ask you questions based on of what your actors are being paid, how many performances you'll be doing, how large of the size of your house is, the number of tickets, and if your tickets are tiered. Meaning, are some of your tickets more expensive than others? They want to know that. And they have a formula for themselves, and they will turn around and say to you, to produce 9 performances of Evita, it's going to cost you $1,230 in royalties. These are numbers I'm coming up off the top of my head. Additionally, they also have the right, though they frequently won't, to ask you for a percentage of the box office ticket sales. And frequently, some organizations will waive their rights and royalties fees for ticket sales, or vice versa. And it really depends on what your organization is classified as. Most of these licensing companies will ask you if you are an amateur producer or a professional producer. Most nonprofits have the luxury of calling themselves amateur, whether they consider themselves amateur or not. Professional tends to be more defined for profit producing, meaning there's a group of shareholders and backers who are really funding a production. We find this more common in Broadway producing or on national tour level scale of producing. But in our own sort of hometown community theater quality of producing, you can treat yourself as an amateur, and frequently rights are as cheap as $100 per performance. And those are for the well-known, well-versed, big important pieces of theater that are out there. What is difficult is when you find an original work, because then you have to negotiate those rules between you and either the playwright, if the playwright has a manager, or if the playwright has a agent, you start working with them to create what the manager, producer, playwright all feel is in the artist's best interest. And atypical licensing fees. Now that you will generally find those more along the lines of rare works or mega musicals. Everything from opera, the modern contemporary operas, because they are in public domain. Anything in the last 75 years is not public domain, and chances are has a copyright on it. So you need to be very aware of the copyright infringement issues, because those kinds of lawsuits can really destroy an organization. Non-traditional licensing rights can vary from a percentage of the box office to special needs. Amongst the contractual obligations comes simply the size of the font of the writer's name. all these things are part of the rights and royalties aspect of producing. And so some organizations want a large amount of money for the first performance, and then for each additional performance the fee goes down. For the 5 that I mentioned, there's really no negotiation process, and for the most part they are very understanding that you are all based off the size of your organization and the number of seats you're going to sell. They never sort of stick it to you hand over foot. I really find my personal experience with Samuel French, dramatist, MTI, has been really pleasant, and they're very helpful, and they have a success if they're getting their shows out there. So they also want to be part of your process, be part of your family in terms of being a helpful existence in the producing quality. They're merely there to support and secure the rights of artists themselves, and the initial artists were the composers, writers, and playwrights. So they will work with you. It's for those more interesting individualized that negotiations come into play. A great example is Astor Piazzolla, who is an Argentinian composer. He has a rarely produced tango opera musical called Maria de Buenos Aires, and it's licensed through Warner Brothers. And you have to go through Warner Brothers. It's not a normal licensing agency, and you're talking with several different agents along the way. You can secure rights for the performance, but then you have to go through someone else to secure rights to the orchestration. And then the step after that, securing rental rights so that you can get the orchestration here and learn it. And they will work with you on a certain degree because, again, their success is getting the show out there. And if they can get your show produced, they will work with you along the way. And there is a certain amount of leverage in terms of saying, this is a regional premiere. It's never been produced here before. We're bringing this artist's work to a mass. How can you help us achieve that with a limited fiscal background and a limited budget? And they will work with you. So I find it's really important to have a very open dialogue. Don't try ever to pull a fast one, for lack of a better phrase. They will work with you. 18 months minimum. At 18 months, you should say, you've made your decision, I'm producing A View from the Bridge. At 18 months out, you start creating a production schedule, meaning the show will open at this time, 18 months from now, and it will run for 6 weeks. And then you start working backwards. Start at the final destination and work your way backwards, because it'll create a very definitive schedule for yourself. 6 months before your first performance, you should have secured rights for the performance. And sometimes it's as easy as I said, going to the licensing company, and I can tell you I've gotten rights in as little as 3 days from application to signed contract. And it is that simple, but you have to go through the process. There is a process. So at 18 months out, you decide. I would say 12 months out, you have a production budget. No later than 10 months out, you've hired your production team, meaning designers, your director, stage manager, etc. 9 months out, you've set your audition dates. 8 months out, you've begun discussions amongst the designers, the producers, and the director in achieving the production itself. And 7 to 6 months out, the process can begin. 3 months before performance, you can start having auditions. And then based off the needs of your own particular theater, you rehearse 6 to 8 weeks before you open. For those producers that have the hardest and most difficult time, it's because of poor planning, and so they're unable to meet challenges that happen. Everything from a broken foot from a lead actress to royalties being pulled by a licensing company, an agent, because you have to remember these rights and royalties are being licensed to you, and it is a privilege now to produce. And at any time they can pull them, because amongst the things you have to worry about is, if I have a show being premiered in Dallas, can that same show receive a Fort Worth premiere at the same time? A lot of these organizations, once you've signed your contract and you have rights, they've created a perimeter where they will not allow another production to occur within that perimeter of your theater. Sometimes that perimeter is 30 miles, sometimes that perimeter is 100 miles. And the difference between professional and amateur will also define that. You may be granted rights as an amateur, but if a professional company wants to come in, they can do one of two things: produce regardless of your contract, or your contract can be taken away. These are all the little ins and outs that become part of your planning process.